Hi Beatle fans, Glenn here, your low-end music freak. If you're in your 60s and lived in North America as a child, probably the first time you saw the Beatles was in February of 1964 on the Ed Sullivan Show. The first song they played was All My Loving. I actually did this video once already and YouTube blocked it because I was playing All My Loving in the background, so sorry there's no music to accompany this video. Anyway, I wanted to do a Beatles video because I call myself a low-end music freak, but I could be called the Beatles freak because I've been a huge fan since 1964 when they invaded North America. My first recollection was probably Chum AM Radio in Toronto, which was the biggest pop station in Canada at the time. They started playing Beatles songs at least a couple of weeks before they arrived here. Maybe it was sooner than that. I specifically remember that Saturday being in my uncle's car and they were playing the Beatles all day long, it seemed. I guess in the excitement of leading up to the performance on Sunday. So on Sunday, my parents and I went to my Aunt Marg and Uncle Walter's house for dinner. The show was starting at 8 o'clock. I remember vividly sitting in front of the TV set, excited as hell. My parents and my aunt and uncle on the couch behind me. When the Beatles came out and started playing, I was freaking out, and I can hear in the background them laughing, especially when the Beatles would shake their hair and do the oohs and whatever else in the songs. And then when they put on the bottom of the screen under John Lennon, Sorry Girls, He's Married, they got a big chuckle out of that. Clearly our generation won out in the end because it turned out not to be such a joke. There was a lot more to it than they could see. Later that summer though, my parents, wonderful parents, took me to the drive-in to see A Hard Day's Night, which was really nice of them. They actually enjoyed the film. I'm not sure if they liked the music that much, but the film is so cute and funny and so well done that it's hard not to enjoy it no matter what age you are. So that was a big deal for me. I bought, in Canada it was Beatlemania with the Beatles, then the album called Twist and Shout. I'm sure any Beatles collectors and fans would know those Canadian albums. They were, especially Twist and Shout, was only available in Canada. So I wanted to start off by ranking the albums, my least favorite to my favorite. Now let me say that I love them all. They all could be number one in my book, so it's not a slam against any of the albums. They're all very important to me. I'm going to start off with Yellow Submarine. This is only has like 6 songs on it that the Beatles perform on. The other side of the album is instrumental soundtrack music created by George Martin. The songs on here are great. I mean, Only a Northern Song is great. Hey Bulldog's one of my favorites. It's All Too Much is a great psychedelic song from George Harrison. Still love the album, but something's got to come last, so this is it. What I understand is I read somewhere that the Beatles, when they wrote a song that they didn't like that much, they would say it's good enough for Yellow Submarine. So anyway, there we go. Next, the Beatles, Please Please Me. I mean, this was their first album in the UK. What can you say? It's a classic album. There's just such great songs on it. To start, I Saw Her Standing There, and Please Please Me, and Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You, Twist and Shout. I mean, just it's a great album, but I guess it just doesn't have the same emotional connection with me because it wasn't released this way in Canada. But still an awesome debut album. Next, Beatles For Sale. Another great album. Actually, the first 2 songs in this album, the way it starts with No Reply and I'm a Loser, is just a killer 1-2 punch to start an album. So Babies in Black is on here, and I'll Follow the Sun. A lot of covers on here. I guess that maybe that's why it gets a lower ranking. Kansas City, they're all well done though. Mr. Moonlight, Kansas City, Words of Love, it's got I Don't Want to Spoil the Party on here, which is a great song. I mean, it's just a fantastic album, but again, I have to rank it low in the Beatles canon. Next, Let It Be. Again, an album I play a lot. I love it, but I think because Phil Spector crapped all over it, I would have much preferred just hearing the Beatles do these songs, like when you watch the movie, or Let It Be Naked, although Let It Be Naked, the quality wasn't done as well as it should have been. Great album with some great songs on it. Let It Be. Looking forward to the 50th anniversary box to see what they come out with. It should be really really good. Let It Be. Next, A Hard Day's Night. I mean, just a classic album. There's not a bad song on this record. So one of my favorite Beatles songs is You Can't Do That. That's on here. I seem to really gravitate to the John songs when I was younger. Since reflecting back now, I'd say in the last 20 years or 30 years, I've really become much more of a McCartney fan, especially on the solo stuff. Paul just did some great stuff, the Beatles. Yeah, Hard Day's Night, I should have known better. Just a great, great album. Next, the next film, Help. I actually am one person who likes the Help movie better than A Hard Day's Night. I know it's not as artsy and the black and white and the way it was done, but I think it's funny as hell. I've seen it like 1,000 times and I still laugh at the same jokes. It's pretty dry humor. It's British humor. It's great. This is an amazing album, Help, the title song. You've got to Hide Your Love Away. John's kind of first shot at the Dylan influence. Ticket to Ride, one of my favorite Beatles songs. Great, great album. Next, I rank this probably higher than a lot of people do, With the Beatles. Like I said, in Canada, With the Beatles was it had Beatlemania with the Beatles on it, and same cover. Won't Be Long, great opening track. I rank this highly because I think I have an emotional connection to it because it was my first Beatles record in 1964 when it came out. I love the covers on this album. Their vocal performance on You Really Got a Hold on Me and Please Mr. Postman are incredible. Just love them. Money's just a killer rocker. John's vocals on that are awesome. Great album. Next, Magical Mystery Tour. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, this was originally an EP, the way the Beatles intended it in the UK, with just the songs from the film Magical Mystery Tour. In North America, they released it as a full album and then added 6 tracks to or 5 tracks with Hello, Goodbye, and Strawberry Fields, which is my favorite Beatles song. I Am the Walrus is on here. A great, great album. Just it's kind of like a psychedelic album, I guess. Next, Rubber Soul. Another fantastic album. This is kind of more of an acoustic-y album. I think the Dylan influence was really starting to show through here. The lyrics were getting more introspective. This is definitely when the change started happening. You could really see the music changing, and they were maturing as artists for sure. Next, the White Album. Fantastic album. You can tell they were more working individually, a lot more. A lot of these songs were written when they were in India. I remember vividly when this album came out the night before, Chum FM, the underground FM station in Toronto, played the album in its entirety starting around 10 o'clock at night, and I was just glued to the radio listening to it. Thought, oh my God, this is going to be incredible. And the next day running out and buying the album. Always loved the inserts on this album. I also have the 50th anniversary CD set, 6 CD set with the same inserts. So my plan is when we can leave the house and actually go to a store, maybe I can buy 4 frames. I'm going to frame these pictures. I love them. I always had them up on my wall when I was younger. Next, I know everybody ranks this as number 1, or a lot of people do. Abbey Road. I mean, just an incredible album. I think side 2 with the medley is probably the greatest side of music ever recorded. This album could easily be the number 1 album of all time. It's a fantastic record. I can't say anything bad about it. It's got to go somewhere in the ranking, so it's the 3rd best. Next, Revolver. Revolver's an incredible album. A lot of people nowadays consider this their best album. It certainly has some great stuff on it. I mean, they start with Taxman, and I love George when he started getting into the sitar with Love You Too. That really appealed to me. She Said about the acid trip with Peter Fonda. Dr. Robert about the guy who doled out all the drugs. Tomorrow Never Knows is a great psychedelic song. I mean, this is just an incredible album. Great cover by Klaus Voormann. What can you say about Revolver? It's got to be up there as one of the greatest albums of all time. And number one for me, Sgt Pepper. Released in the UK on June 1st, 1967. I think a week later in Canada and the US. What I remember was, I think on June 8th was the our world satellite broadcast where the Beatles played live All You Need Is Love to hundreds of millions of people who were watching around the world. I watched that, and I remember within a few days of that, I owned the album. So that's my recollection of owning it. Mind-blowing album the first time you heard this in 1967. It was crazy. It kickstarted the Summer of Love, which is one of the great years to have lived through musically that I've ever lived through. This album is so iconic, that from the cover to the lyrics on the back, the songs, the way they flow together. I mean, end with A Day in the Life. I mean, just incredible. George's Within You, Without You, I think is one of the most beautiful songs ever written. I just love it. Sgt. Pepper, iconic album. After that, I'm going to say My Beatles Journey. I still love them very much. The Monkees came around in 1966-67, and I became a big Monkees fan. I'm not saying they overtook the Beatles as my number one favorite, but man, it was close. I went to see the Monkees at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto in 1966. As for the Beatles tours, 64, 65, and 66, I was quite aware of them at the time, but it was hard to get tickets. I remember asking my mom in 64 if she could get tickets, and she couldn't get any. 65, I think, was the same thing. If I recall correctly, in 1966, I don't think the show sold out, and I don't think it sold out in many venues in North America. Clearly, we know from history what it tells us about how troubled the tour was and why they wanted it to end, but in hindsight, I wish I had gone, but at the time you're thinking, well, there's a 66 tour, and then there's going to be a 67 tour, and a 68 tour, and a 69 tour, so there'll always be time. So that's one of my regrets in life, is not going to one of those shows. Would like to show you this, though. It's a picture of the Beatles performing at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto in 1965. Along with that, you'll also see the ticket stubs from all three tours. There's one stub for each year. I got the stubs in the 90s from somebody when I was collecting a lot of Beatles memorabilia. I used to be a big memorabilia collector. I had autographs. I had Paul's and George's and Ringo's autographs, and a lot of the dolls and the toys that came out in the 60s. The car mascot Nodding dolls, and the Remco dolls, and the big Sgt. Pepper dolls, and just a ton of Beatles memorabilia. I sold it off. I started to think, hey, is the next generation going to be as interested in the toys? I know the music's timeless, but are they going to have the same love for this stuff? And I was afraid maybe it would lose value. It certainly hasn't as yet, because I still look online to see what things are worth, and if I could ever find something original cheap, I would probably pick it up. But I sold it off, and sometimes I regret it, but I did enjoy having it at the time. I enjoyed collecting it and looking for it, and it was a lot of fun. How the Beatles impacted my life, I mean, incredibly musically, obviously. I was a huge John Lennon fan, and he's been my hero since 1964, or one of them. I know he had his faults, but he was human, and but I love John. I love all the Beatles. How it affected my family, I mean, my kids grew up with the Beatles, so my daughters Andrew and Stephanie are both big Beatle fans to this day. Funny story, when my daughter Stephanie was, I'm going to say in grade 7 or grade 8, the teacher showed a documentary on the Beatles, and before the movie started, she handed out a sheet with 10 questions so the kids would pay attention to the movie, obviously, and answer the questions. Stephanie answered all the questions before the movie started. She knew them all, just da 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 da. It was great. So the whole family's been Beatle fans. One of the biggest moments in my life, obviously, is getting married to my beautiful wife Lynn in 1999. We had our wedding, and we used Here, There, and Everywhere as our wedding song. On our honeymoon, we went to England. We flew into Manchester and rented a car and drove to Liverpool and spent a few days in Liverpool doing the whole Beatles thing. It was almost a religious experience for me. We saw, the church where John and Paul met, and went to the New Cavern Club, and went to all the historic sites. We went on one of those tour buses, a Magical Mystery Tour bus or whatever, and it passed John's house, but it wouldn't really stop. So we took a cab back later, and it got him to drop us off in front of John's house, and just stood there staring at it, kind of just soaking in all the history and kind of reliving it all. And you read so many books on the Beatles that the house on Menlove Avenue is it almost feels like you live there yourself. So while we were there, it was still private at the time, and there was a sign on the lawn that said, do not enter the property or whatever. And but I'd come 2,000 miles, and this was a huge moment for me. I kind of snuck up the driveway, and I walked up, and I peeled this little tiny piece of concrete. It's this real thin piece off the house, and it's only about not even an inch by an inch big. And I brought it home, and I put it in a frame with a picture of the house that I took. And we moved in November, and I packed it away. And do you think I can find it? I really wanted to show you guys that for this video, but it's around somewhere. I'll find it eventually. Anyway, that's about it. There was my nephew Jack, who's 16 years old. He's a big Beatles fan too. I think they just it just defines generations. It's unbelievable how every generation seems to fall in love with the Beatles. Unbelievable. But they continue to amaze. It's the greatest story probably ever told. I mean, just how the start with the tragedy of John and Paul losing their mothers, and then meeting as teenagers, sharing the grief, starting the love of music, and starting writing songs together. Stu Sutcliffe and his sad demise from the brain tumor, and meeting Astrid and Klaus Warman, and just the whole story just goes on and on. There's so many tragedies and so much love, and it's I don't know if you could write a book of fiction to tell the Beatles story. It's incredible. Thank you all for watching. We will see you next time.